And hello, we are going to be looking at how bureaucrats, as well as the bureaucracy in general, create policy for the government. I just love this picture. It's really silly, and I think it does a really good job of kind of going over some of the complaints about bureaucracy in just a funny, silly way without being crude or crass. The real power of bureaucracy, as we talked about the first day, is this ability to implement policy, the ability to almost pretty much make it. When Congress creates a law, the president signs it. It's up to the bureaucracies, these agencies and departments, to fill in the details and to make sure these laws are carried out properly. Because these bureaucrats are the ones in charge of these programs, and because Congress has so many things on its plate and there's so many rules and regulations in each one of these different agencies and departments, Congress is giving these agencies what's called enabling power. The bureaucracy is acting as the quasi-legislative branch. They're the ones that make the rules, that kind of fill in the blank when there's questions there. One of my favorite examples is you take the word disabled. If you have a law that grants money to people who are disabled, it's up to the bureaucrats, the bureaucracy, to decide what does disabled mean. Or when the unemployment numbers come out every month, the government has a definition of who is unemployed. And according to the government, you are unemployed if you are out of work and seeking a job. If you are out of work and have given up, technically you're not unemployed, even though you really are unemployed. So that ability to enable bureaucrats to make rules is a very powerful one, something that we don't always think about. What we're focusing on today a little bit is how each of the three branches we've talked about, as well as other linkage institutions, influence bureaucracy. Bureaucracy doesn't report to one specific person. You have the president, but Congress and the courts, they all have a role to play with bureaucracy. The biggest and most important power of Congress over really anything, but especially the bureaucracy, are the purse strings, the ability to control an agency's budget, to give more money, to take away money. Number one, biggest power there is. Sometimes the Congress can overturn an agency's decision through a new law. We're seeing there's a big issue now over whether religious institutions should be forced to provide contraception to people that work for the institution. And Congress didn't make that rule. This was part of the health care law passed in 2010, and it was the Department of Health and Human Services that made this policy implementation. And now you're seeing a lot of talk in Congress of potentially writing a law that takes that power away from the Department of Health and Human Services. So we'll see where that goes. Obviously, we talked a lot about this when we were in Unit 4, but oversight, Congress has the ability to look into possible agency wrongdoings, as well as just to regularly check to see if agencies are complying and are using government resources and taxpayer money efficiently and effectively. Really cool chart right here. It talks about bureaucracy and how there's 5 laws that really do a good job in trying to keep bureaucracy as open as possible. And the most important law that you should know is this one right here. It's called the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. And what this does is it forces agencies to give out documents and materials to people on request if there's no national security danger involved. And so if NASA has something really cool that you want to see, you can write to NASA and get copies of that information. It can take a little while to get information through a FOIA petition, but it is a really cool check on the bureaucracy. They can't do everything in secret and in the dark. The president obviously is really important, as we've talked about. He's responsible for appointing the leaders of many of the agencies and cabinet departments with Senate approval. Going back, this is bringing up a little bit of the presidency unit as well. When he gives an executive order, kind of like a command that has the force of a law, executive orders are used with these departments and agencies to force them, to tell them to do things. that might not have been written in the congressional legislation. As we talked about with Congress, how they have the power of the purse, the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, recommends, what an agency should receive in a given year. And as we know through the Budget Reform Act of 1974, Congress and the President really do work together to try to divvy out the money, even though the main power of money comes from Congress, according to the Constitution. The President can help reorganize an agency. However, only Congress can abolish an agency. So if you want to get rid of the Department of Education, as many Republicans running for president do, Congress would have to do that, not the President. And then finally, the courts. You can, an average citizen can sue an agency or department if they feel that department is doing some type of wrong to them. And there's also these things called injunctions, where you can demand that an action by a government agency stop because you feel it is wrong, taking away your liberties as well. And then, think about judicial review. The Supreme Court can use the power of judicial review to look at a bureaucratic action as well as a presidential action or a congressional law and say this goes against the Constitution, and they can wipe that out as well. This is just a cool little chart that shows how the president can check the bureaucracy, calling for the resignation of a secretary, threatening the budget cuts, though you need Congress's support, of course, and then just using that bully pulpit, something we've talked about a lot, to just kind of get bureaucratic agencies to try to go along with what the president wants. Iron triangles are these interesting aspects. These are something that you don't see as much anymore. You see more of these issue networks. But an iron triangle, you think about what something that's iron is something that is very hard to remove, something very stable and strong. An iron triangle is when you have bureaucratic agencies, interest groups, and legislators, usually in like subcommittees. All three of these groups are working together to try to make policy, make a bill or law that benefits their interests. All right, so you have, it's not like every agency, every interest group, and every legislator. It's these little subsectors, like you might have people interested in tobacco farming or people interested in military spending, involved in deciding the policy, and they all have something to gain or lose. Iron triangles, they're independent of each other, meaning they're not always connected, and each part here, the agency, the interest group, and the legislators, they all have some type of goal, and it usually involves getting more money or getting some type of resource. And as we just said, they're iron, and because they're iron, they're very hard to remove. It's something that is ingrained and very stable. And so let's talk a little bit more about how an iron triangle works. So you take Congress, you take members in Congress, and what they often do is they might show certain favor to different interest groups in order to get votes, to get campaign contributions, to get PAC money. And you have to remember, each committee is specialized in different parts of the economy, different areas. And so they're going to primarily focus with those types of groups, not just interest groups in general. When this occurs, this is called, one of the textbooks talks about how this is when the interest group has captured the agency in a way that the interest group knows that Congress wants their money to get reelected, and so the interest group kind of has the member of Congress in its grips. The agency then does the committee's bidding because the bureaucratic agency, hey, they want more money, they want more resources through the budget appropriation process, and so they don't want to lose their stature. And then eventually the committee might not be very careful when it comes to monitoring the agency's activity. Maybe they're relying more on the agency to implement policies that their constituents want, that the interest group wants. So you kind of see how each of these groups has something to gain and lose. Congress wants the political support, they want the money support. The agency wants more money, more power. And then the interest group, they want rules and laws that are favorable to them, that do not limit them. This is a pretty cool little picture here. It's an image that kind of shows how you have each part of the iron triangle, bureaucracy, interest group, Congress, and how they all kind of get something in return from their role and position. So here you have the fake iron triangle, and one of the things that you should be able to do is identify what each part of this triangle would want and how they're all kind of connected. This is something that you should be familiar with for your exam, and we'll talk more about that in class. Let me jump to this last slide, excuse me, and something that has become more prevalent in modern times are these things called issue networks. Similar to an iron triangle, 3 parts. You know, you have a triangle, 3 sides, but an issue network is much more broad, and they focus on a lot more policies. They involve a lot more people. They are these loose and informal relationships where there's a lot of different actors and groups involved trying to promote policies that are favorable. And oftentimes you have people from interest groups, you know, you have people from Congress, maybe they're staff members. You might have advocates from think tanks, people in academic universities, and then you also have members of the media that are all kind of involved in trying to promote interests to help themselves out. They often debate, advocate, they might write position papers, they might go on TV, they might run commercials, they might get their members to try to support policies that promote their respective philosophies in different areas. Issue networks, something that the AP exam likes to focus on a little bit more than iron triangles. They're much more prevalent, as we said. They're happening a lot more. It's a lot harder to see because there's all these different people involved and they don't always kind of communicate with each other directly, but you see them happen. You see it happen, especially today when you have so much decentralization. You have so many people out there in the media, so many people out there using social media that people can communicate and kind of promote and push policy instead of just meeting in a... And we will end here for today. We will talk more about the alternatives to bureaucracy and the reforms that go with it in our next class. If you have any questions, let me know. Make sure you participate in the Google form at the bottom of this video. I hope you learned a little bit. This is confusing stuff, so if you have any questions, make sure you write them down and let me know. Have a good one. Bye-bye.